Good morning. The topic of today's talk is the origin of the zodiac signs. The star groups we recognize today were only agreed to in 1922 when the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, formally accepted a list of 88 constellations. Then in 1928, the IAU adopted official constellation boundaries that together cover the entire celestial sphere. Constellations are like states or countries on a terrestrial map, and they have borders, of course, that are imaginary, and everything that's included in that border is part of the constellation, including the stars that are drawn together to make imaginary pictures. And any given point in a celestial coordinate system lies in one of those modern constellation borders and is imagined on this also imaginary celestial sphere. Every culture that we know of has gazed at the stars, drawing pictures that connected them and telling stories in olden times by a fire and to pass the time and to pass the knowledge along of the culture. Different cultures have seen very different pictures with different mythical stories about adventures going back to the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Sumerians, and the Maya of Central America, and, of course, many other cultures. In our time, myth is considered to be like a fairy tale or a fictional flight of fancy, but in ages past, myth was a means for describing and transmitting profound truths in a way that could be recognized and remembered. Myths were carefully crafted stories intended to transmit timeless truths through symbols, metaphors, and archetypes. Linguistically, the word myth equates with mouth and carries the meaning of orally transmitted stories. The earliest references to the mythological significance of the Greek constellations are found in the works of Homer, dating to the 7th century before the current era. In the Iliad, Homer describes the creation of Achilles' shield by the blacksmith god Hephaestus. Quote, "On it he made the earth, sky, sea, the weariless sun, and the moon waxing full, and all the constellations that crown the heavens. Pleiades, Hyades, mighty Orion, and the Bear." Close quote. At the time of Homer, most constellations were known as the objects or animals that they represented, such as the bull or the ram. 2 centuries later, in the works of Eratosthenes, the constellations were associated with myths. Most of the planets' names come from Roman mythology and reflect their characteristics. Mercury, who is the messenger of the god, revolves fastest around the sun. Venus, goddess of love and beauty, shines the brightest. Mars, god of war, looks blood red. And Jupiter, king of the gods, is the largest planet in the solar system. The planets were the gods and goddesses who traveled through the mythical starry realms of the zodiac constellations. How astrology works is still a mystery. Our science really doesn't understand it. But from tarot cards to tea leaves and the I Ching to the Oracle of Delphi, there are many systems of divination. It seems to be the nature of reality, or our place relative to it, that it can be discerned through systems that develop their own language and symbolism based on universal archetypes. Some have speculated that astrology is a revealed body of knowledge and partakes of the nature of reality itself. The zodiac is a description of sequential and repeating experience on multiple levels of simultaneous expression. And as we travel this wheel annually and over the long cycle of the ages, we as individuals with brief lifespans experience a different series of these energies in turn. Humanity also moves around this wheel as a collective consciousness, evolving and unfolding according to a pattern. Astrology is living myth, and the 12 constellations of the zodiac wheel tell a series of great stories. There are often multiple myths that were adapted over time. Where possible, I have chosen the older stories. Aries, the first first zodiac sign, first constellation of ancient times, is an ancient star group that has been seen as a ram since Babylonian times, at least 4,000 years ago. In later Greek myth, Aries became associated with the golden ram that rescued Phrixus and Helle, who were the son and daughter of King Athamas and his first wife. The king's second wife became jealous and wanted to kill the children, so she caused a famine and falsified a message from the oracle of Delphi that Phrixus must be sacrificed to end the famine. Athamas was about to sacrifice his own son when Ares, sent by Nephele, the first wife, arrived. Phrixus sacrificed the ram to Zeus in his stead, and the golden fleece was hung in a sacred place and guarded by a dragon. In later myth, Jason and the Argonauts stole the fleece, but that's another story. The mythology of Taurus, the second sign, began with a wandering bull known as Ceres that was enormous and powerful and had the unfortunate tendency to trample anything in his path. Most people assumed he was immortal because of his size and strength. One day, the goddess Persephone found him trampling through a field of flowers. Though he couldn't speak, he seemed to understand her, and her presence calmed him. Persephone taught the bull patience and how to use his strength wisely. Every spring, when Persephone returns to the land from her period of time in Hades, Ceres joins her. She sits on his back, and they run through the fields, allowing her to cause the plants to bloom. In the fall, when Persephone returns to the underworld, Ceres returns to the sky as the constellation of Taurus. In the case of Gemini, this constellation represents the twin brothers Castor and Pollux. Leda was their mother, and Helen of Troy was their sister. But the twins had different fathers. In the same night, Leda became pregnant by Jupiter, who took the form of a swan, and then by her husband, King Tyndareus of Sparta. Pollux was the son of a god, and therefore immortal and renowned for his strength, while his mortal brother Castor was famous for his skill with horses. The twins were traditionally depicted with spears and riding a matched pair of snow-white horses. The most common explanation for their presence in the heavens is that Pollux was overcome with sorrow when his mortal brother died, and begged Zeus to allow him to share his immortality. Zeus acknowledged the heroism of the brothers and reunited them in the stars as the constellation of Gemini. Cancer's origin was a giant crab named Krios who guarded the sea nymphs in the Greek god Poseidon's kingdom. He was enormous and strong, and Poseidon had blessed him with immortality. When the monster Typhon terrorized the Olympian gods, Poseidon, along with most of the other gods, went into hiding. He left Krios to protect the sea nymphs, who were Poseidon's daughters. After a time, some of the nymphs became restless and convinced him that they were in no danger from Typhon, and they escaped into the open sea. Krios could not chase them since he was protecting the others, so he enlisted the help of a giant squid, Vamari. However, Vamari had his own dark intentions and devoured the nymphs. Vamari told the crab that he could not find the missing sea nymphs, but Krios knew he was lying, and they battled until the crab finally won. But he sustained crippling injuries, and since he was immortal, he had to live in pain. Poseidon rewarded the crab's bravery by relieving his pain, but not his immortality, and he placed him in the sky as the constellation of Cancer. Leo is one of the oldest constellations and was seen as a lion by the Sumerians and Mesopotamians at least 5,000 years ago. To the Greeks, Leo is said to represent the Nemean lion who was killed by Hercules during the first of his 12 labors, which is a story in itself, about the hero in all of us making a spiritual journey through the Zodiac. According to the myth, the Nemean lion had an impenetrable skin. Hercules overcame this obstacle by wrestling the lion to the ground and strangling it. He removed one of its claws and skinned the beast. Afterward, Hercules wore the lion's skin as protection. Although being placed among the stars is generally a reward, both Eratosthenes and Hyginus wrote that the lion was placed among the constellations because he was the king of beasts. Virgo, the sixth constellation or sign, represents many harvest goddesses of antiquity, such as Demeter, and signifies the cycle of fertility and the harvest. She is shown holding a sheaf of grain, usually wheat, which is the alpha star in the constellation named Spica. Virgo is the only female figure among the zodiac constellations. Even though that's the case, she represents a very ancient stream of goddesses. She is said to embody the fertility of the earth and to announce the annual harvest. Libra was equated with the goddess Astraea, the Star Maiden, or Starry One, who weighed the claims of opposing parties in disputes. The emblem of her office was the scales of Libra, which are next to Virgo in the sky, and it was said Astraea was the last of the immortals to remain on Earth, but she finally left when humans descended into violence and hatred. She ascended to the sky to hold the scales of justice that are now part of the constellation. Hesiod describes daimones that are invisible spirits who watch over humanity, and Astraea was the daimone or daimone whose province is justice. And sadly, in addition to there only being one feminine constellation, the constellation of Libra has been reduced from an ancient goddess of justice to only her scales. Scorpio is identified with the scorpion that stung and killed Orion, the hunter. Some stories say Gaia, the goddess of the earth, sent the scorpion, but others say it was Artemis, goddess of the hunt, because Orion had dared to hunt all the animals under her protection. Others say Orion had attempted to force himself on Artemis, so she sent the scorpion after him. Orion was subsequently resurrected by Asclepius, god of healing, who appears in the sky as Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer constellation. Asclepius himself was later killed by one of Zeus's thunderbolts because he was bringing too many people back to life and depopulating the underworld. Each year, as Orion rises, the scorpion sets, crushed by the heel of Ophiuchus, thus avoiding further conflict. The myth of Sagittarius refers to Crotus, a satyr who lived on Mount Helicon with the Muses. Satyrs are described as having human heads and torsos with 2 goat legs. Depending on the source, satyrs can have a horse's tail. Crotus was the son of the goat god Pan and Euphemine, nurse to the Muses, and like the wise centaur Chiron, was a talented musician and devoted to the Muses and their arts. He was also a skilled hunter and credited with the invention of the bow, something not ordinarily used by centaurs. Centaurs and satyrs were wild creatures with no respect for authority or decorum, but Crotus and Chiron were exceptions. Both were knowledgeable and kind to humans. Crotus was so well loved by the Muses that they asked Zeus to place him among the stars, and so Crotus became Sagittarius and Chiron became Centaurus. Capricorn has been represented with the head and body of a goat and the tail of a fish or dolphin from ancient times. Precus was an immortal sea-goat who was favored by the Greeks and who could manipulate time. Sea-goats were intelligent and honorable creatures. Precus had many children who lived near the seashore, but when they found themselves on dry land, they turned into ordinary goats and lost their ability to think and to speak. Precus repeatedly turned back time to prevent his children from finding their way out of the water onto the land, but eventually he resigned himself to loneliness and misery, letting the little sea goats leave. He did not want to be the only one of his race, so he asked Kronos to let him die. Because he was immortal, he must spend eternity in the sky as the constellation of Capricorn. Predating Greek mythology, the powerful Babylonian god Ea watched over the land by day, but returned to live in the ocean every night. He also had the head and body of a goat and the tail of a fish. Aquarius, the water bearer, represented by Ganymede, cupbearer to the Olympian gods. He was a beautiful Phrygian youth whom Zeus watched as Ganymede tended his father's flocks on Mount Ida. The king of the gods became enamored of the boy and flew down in the form of a large bird, whisking Ganymede away to the heavens. Since then, the boy has been cupbearer to the gods, replacing the goddess Iris, and serving ambrosia, which gave the gods their immortality. Pisces. This story occurs during the same attack on Mount Olympus mentioned earlier in Cancer, when the monster Typhon startled the gods into taking different forms to escape. Jupiter transformed himself into a ram, Mercury became an ibis, Apollo took the shape of a crow, and Diana disguised herself as a cat. Venus and her son Cupid were bathing on the banks of the Euphrates River and took the shape of a pair of fish to escape danger. Minerva later immortalized the event by placing the figures of the two fish among the stars. And Pisces represents these two fish tied together with a cord. So how, you might wonder, did these individual myths become grafted onto what later became the astrological signs and their sequential significance and interpretation? The mythological source out of which astrology has developed and grown is a rich ore of knowledge that is waiting to be mined at deeper levels. Mythologist Joseph Campbell lamented that modern culture has no myths that give meaning in a present-day context. It seems we look through an ancient lens that no longer has a basis in our growing technological society. And it may be that the millennial-old frame of astrology needs to be reconstructed with myths that speak to modern people. But the magic is, astrology still works, and people's lives follow these chart patterns and are informed by these mythic stories, even as our window to the universe opens wider and more mythic beings are discovered and named, even in our own solar system, like dwarf planets and Plutoids and Cubewanos and others, as the stories grow and things continue to unfold.